step into a world where noble ideals clash with sinister secrets, where global cooperation teeters on the brink of deception and hope gives way to a colossal corruption that shakes the very foundations of trust. Join us on a riveting journey of one of the greatest financial scandals of modern times, as we unveil the astonishing tale of the UN's Oil for Food program. Imagine an epic humanitarian endeavor that morphed into a global multi-billion-dollar scandal and an international catastrophe of staggering proportions. Yet as questions mounted, they were met with barriers of obfuscation and a palpable reluctance to probe deeper. But hold on to your seats, for this saga goes far beyond the surface. Welcome to From Pharaohs to Presidents, where we delve into the hidden realms of power and the untold stories that have shaped our world, where stories become our compass and knowledge becomes power. Today, as we plunge into history, we'll shed light on truths that will challenge your perception of international cooperation like never before, and what it can lead to if not thought through properly. It's the year 1990, and the balance of power in the Middle East was shifting. Iraq, under the leadership of Saddam Hussein, made a shocking move by invading its wealthy southern neighbor, Kuwait. This bold act by Iraq came from a mix of economic pressures, territorial disputes over the Rumaila oil field, and debts from the Iran-Iraq War. These debts, interestingly, came from Iraq borrowing substantial amounts of money from several Arab states, and especially from its affluent neighbor, Kuwait. By the end of the Iraq-Iran War, Iraq found itself steeped in debt, with Saddam Hussein's regime feeling the weight of these financial burdens. Following the conflict, one of Iraq's points of contention with Kuwait was directly linked to these outstanding debts. Saddam argued that the war had been fought in part to protect the broader Arab community, including Kuwait, from the influence and potential aggression of revolutionary Iran. Thus, he believed that some of Iraq's debt to Kuwait should be forgiven, or at least terms should be more favorable to Iraq. Prior to this conflict, Iraq and Kuwait were both founding members of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or as it's widely known, OPEC, an intergovernmental organization founded in 1960 to coordinate the 13-member countries' petroleum policies, ensuring stable oil prices, a consistent income for its members, and a steady supply for consumers, thereby significantly influencing global energy markets and oil production. A key aspect was established oil production quotas for its member states, in an attempt to stabilize oil prices, and Iraq accused Kuwait of producing above its OPEC-assigned quota. This overproduction was seen as contributing to a fall in global oil prices, meaning less profit, and another major reason underpinning Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. Iraq believed, perhaps naively, that the world would turn a blind eye, especially given how just 10 years prior in 1980, the West supported Iraq in their taxing 8-year war against Iran. However, the world watched in collective shock and condemnation as Iraq swiftly invaded and took over Kuwait. The UN promptly slapped sanctions on Iraq, immediately placing a trade embargo with the exception of food and medicine. But international intervention was inevitable. Operation Desert Shield began with a coalition of 34 nations, led primarily by the US, amassing to defend Saudi Arabia and deter further Iraqi aggression. When Saddam Hussein ignored UN resolutions demanding Iraqi withdrawal from Kuwait by January 15, 1991, this defensive operation transitioned to the offensive Operation Desert Storm. A significant air offensive initiated the campaign, which, in a rapid 42-day military span, successfully liberated Kuwait. Yet, amidst the roaring jets and rumbling tanks, an unseen consequence emerged. The ordinary people of Iraq, already reeling from the weight of previous wars, found themselves trapped in a dire economic crisis due to global sanctions. It became clear that while the international community had acted decisively in a military capacity, a more compassionate approach was needed to address the growing humanitarian crisis. The sanctions hurt Iraq deeply, and the innocent Iraqis suffered. The sanctions lasted for 13 years, from 1990 until 2003, when the US invaded and took over Iraq. The trade embargo blocked all imports into Iraq except for food and medicine. However, the infrastructure to distribute these essential goods was so devastated by bombing and neglect that the exemption made little difference in the immediate post-war years. All Iraqi assets were frozen, and this took away the funds Iraq might have used to buy essential goods on the global market. For example, in 1980, only 4% of Iraqis were undernourished, but by 1996, this had risen to 15% of the population. But the most significant embargo was the one placed on oil. This was the most damaging of all, as oil was the mainstay of the Iraqi economy. Even though medicine was exempt from the sanctions, the overall economic collapse caused by the sanctions led to a lack of basic medical supplies and vaccines. Hospitals became under-resourced, leading to increased mortality and morbidity, and compounded by falling standards of treatment as doctors could not keep their knowledge up to date due to the importation of scientific literature being prohibited under the embargo. Diagnostic equipment and essential infrastructure, like electricity and water purification systems, deteriorated due to a lack of maintenance, spare parts, and replacements. UNICEF estimated that sanctions and war led to the deaths of 500,000 Iraqi children, though these figures are debated with claims of manipulation by Saddam Hussein's regime. The sanctions restricted essential items under a dual-use list, fearing their repurposing for military or weapons of mass destruction applications. This limitation impacted essentials like chlorine for water purification, medical X-ray and radiotherapy equipment, and various items critical to agriculture, education, and industry. Such widespread restrictions exacerbated public health issues, hindered education and research, and deepened the humanitarian crisis in Iraq. To paint the picture of life in Iraq during the era of sanctions, let's step in the shoes of a normal Iraqi citizen. The morning sun rises and you want to toast your bread, but there's no power. Critical components for the power grid have been held back due to their potential military use. Your younger sibling needs new eyeglasses, but the optical equipment to diagnose her prescription is restricted, fearing its repurposing for military optics. You go to the local market hoping to purchase fresh produce, but the crops are sparse. Even simple agricultural machinery and fertilizers are scarce, curtailed because of their potential conversion for warfare. The water you drink every day is no longer as safe. The chlorine essential for purification has been limited, given its potential use in crafting chemical weapons. A neighbor, aspiring to be a scientist, laments that his university lacks the latest scientific instruments. They too are delayed, suspected of possible military applications. This was Iraq under sanctions, a world where the ordinary became extraordinary, and daily essentials became luxuries. With the distressing situation in Iraq unfolding, the United Nations' humanitarian response was the Oil for Food program, introduced in 1995. Essentially, this program allowed Iraq to sell its vast oil reserves on the global market, but with a catch. The revenues weren't directly handed to the Iraqi government. Instead, they were placed in a UN-controlled escrow account. From this account, Iraq could purchase only specific goods, primarily food and medicine, which were then rationed out to the Iraqi populace. This mechanism was established to ensure that the Iraqi regime didn't misuse funds for military or non-humanitarian purposes. Given the potential revenue from Iraqi oil, which at the time had the second largest reserves in the world just behind Saudi Arabia, with around 100 billion barrels worth over $1.7 trillion, the program seemed a balanced approach to providing humanitarian relief while maintaining political pressure. Yet, the funds from the oil sales weren't solely for humanitarian relief. A substantial 30% was allocated for reparations, compensating those affected by Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. And another slice covered the UN's administrative overhead and weapons inspections within Iraq, which ended up costing a staggering $1.2 billion. The Oil for Food program, while conceived with benevolent intentions, unfortunately became a hotbed for manipulation and exploitation. And if you're enjoying this video, please do hit the like and subscribe button so you can see more videos like this one. Saddam Hussein and his officials sidestepped the program's stipulations by devising covert mechanisms to sell oil to neighboring countries at prices that were markedly below the official UN-mandated price. But how did the scheme actually work if the UN was overseeing this action? Let me try to explain. 1. The UN monitored and had to approve all of Iraq's oil sales. 2. All profits from selling the oil went into special UN-controlled escrow accounts. 3. The money from the oil proceeds could then be spent by the UN on non-military or non-dual-use goods for Iraq. 4. The UN gave Iraq a lot of freedom in who they could sell their oil to, and allowed Iraq to select vendors from which the UN would purchase goods from the oil profits. This turned out to be a recipe for disaster. Iraq found a loophole, selling oil at discounted rates to selected companies and then demanding a kickback or unofficial payment in return, enriching the regime. On the flip side, when using the oil funds to purchase goods, Iraq insisted vendors inflate their prices and the excess was secretly funneled back to Iraqi officials. This manipulation let Iraq profit illicitly under the UN's watch. This clandestine operation not only violated the program's guidelines, but also diminished the funds genuinely intended for humanitarian relief. The Oil for Food program turned into oil for corruption. A mere 12 months after the Iraqi regime's curtain fell, startling revelations painted a canvas of dark intrigue. The New York Times laid it out bare. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein's firm hand, wasn't just bending the rules of the UN's program, they were rewriting them entirely. The humanitarian initiative had transformed into an open bazaar of payoffs, favoritism, and kickbacks. From 1997 to 2002, the Oil for Food program raked in a colossal $67 billion for Iraq. But where did this staggering amount end up? Thanks to the shrewd manipulation and scant UN oversight, vast sums vanished into the labyrinth of Iraqi corruption. The US General Accounting Office estimated an eye-watering $10.1 billion was illicitly funneled by the regime, comprising $5.7 billion from oil smuggling, and a further $4.4 billion from brazen surcharges and kickbacks. The very mechanisms used were less sophisticated financial instruments and more old-school on-the-ground smuggling, via pipelines to Syria, by ship through the Persian Gulf, and trucks to Turkey and Jordan. But this wasn't merely an Iraq-centric heist, it was an international masquerade. Over 270 names, spanning politicians, businesses, and entities globally, emerged as beneficiaries. They were the recipients of Iraq's golden tickets, oil vouchers, allegedly handed out at rock-bottom prices. Among the names on this list were some of the world's major corporations, like Daimler Chrysler AG, now known as the Mercedes-Benz Group, and German electronic giant Siemens AG. French and Russian politicians and representatives were deeply implicated. Jean-Bernard Mérimée, a special advisor to the United Nations and known for his pro-Iraq stance, was awarded oil allocations. Meanwhile, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, affiliated with Russia's Liberal Democratic Party, secured substantial Iraqi oil allocations for his party. Similarly, Alexander Voloshin, once the chief of staff to Russian President Vladimir Putin, also benefited from these Iraqi oil allotments. Russia, with no fewer than 46 names on the list, allegedly pocketed a jaw-dropping $1.36 billion in oil vouchers. While Russian and French oil companies had pre-liberation contracts, covering nearly 40% of Iraq's vast oil reserves. The ties ran so deep that documents from Hussein's intelligence service portrayed a web of intelligence sharing with Russia, as well as intimate cooperation between Paris and Baghdad. Yet, what truly stands out from this sprawling saga is the way this whole thing played out. While the scheme was successful, it did not use any genius tactics, but basic kickbacks, under-the-table deals, and standard bribery, executed with such finesse that it nearly crippled an international humanitarian program. But the corruption didn't end at the sale of oil. The goods imported to Iraq under the program, intended to alleviate the suffering of its people, often betrayed a shocking lack of quality and integrity. Various suppliers, purportedly in collusion with corrupt officials, frequently provided goods that were substandard or downright detrimental. The very medicine meant to treat the sick in some instances was expired, and food supplies meant to nourish were labeled unfit for consumption. This not only represented a flagrant financial swindle, but also posed genuine health risks to the already beleaguered Iraqi population. Every sizable international program demands a certain level of administrative support to function efficiently. But with the Oil for Food program, the scale of administrative expenses became a point of contention, reaching a total of $1.2 billion. The UN, responsible for overseeing and implementing the program as mentioned, allocated a portion of the funds, a 2.2% commission on every barrel of oil sold, to cover its administrative overhead and operational costs. These costs encompassed various necessities, such as personnel salaries, office operations, logistics, and audit functions, among others. But given the dire humanitarian backdrop against which the program was initiated, many critics saw this diversion of funds as problematic. They argued that every dollar spent on bureaucracy was a dollar not reaching the starving, sick, and impoverished people of Iraq. In their view, the vast machinery of the UN should have been streamlined or subsidized from other sources, ensuring that the funds generated by Iraq's oil sales went directly and wholly to addressing the humanitarian crisis on the ground. The revelations of corruption within the Oil for Food program pose a deeper, more philosophical quandary about its net impact. Despite the undeniable malfeasance, some experts and historians contend that the program played an indispensable role in averting an even graver humanitarian disaster in Iraq. They highlight how through this initiative, essential supplies like food and medicine reached millions of Iraqis, undoubtedly saving countless lives. This perspective forces one to grapple with a tough ethical question. Can the positive outcomes of a program be seen as justifying or overshadowing its flaws? If a program riddled with corruption nonetheless achieves its principal humanitarian objectives, does that validate its existence and execution? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Critics of this viewpoint maintain that corruption's very presence undermines the program's legitimacy, especially given that the funds misappropriated could have further alleviated the people's suffering. They argue that just because worse outcomes were avoided doesn't mean the program's operation was justified in its entirety. The revelations of corruption within the Oil for Food program sent shockwaves through the international community, leading to questions about the UN and its work. As a result, in 2004, under mounting pressure, the UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan appointed Paul Volcker, former chairman of the US Federal Reserve, to lead an independent inquiry into the allegations. The Volcker Commission's findings, released in several reports in 2005, revealed deep-rooted corruption and management lapses. It confirmed that numerous companies and individuals across various countries had been involved in illicit payments to the Iraqi regime. the scandal tarnished the reputation of the United Nations. Critics saw the corruption as evidence of the institution's inefficiency and susceptibility to manipulation by member states. The UN's reputation was in serious question, especially because of their history of corruption, such as with UN peacekeeping procurement scandals, sexual exploitation and abuse by UN peacekeepers, the Haiti cholera outbreak, whistleblower retaliation, and misuse of funds in various UN agencies and programs. You can explore a deeper insight into the UN's complex history of these challenges in my video on the UN peacekeepers. After the oil for food scandal, the United Nations embarked on a transformative journey of growth and self-improvement. Picture the Office of Internal Oversight Services as a once understated guardian of the UN, now emboldened and empowered, scanning operations with newfound vigor. Next, visualize a beacon of light representing whistleblowers, once dimly lit, now shining brightly, and equipped with an organizational shield and armor, signaling the UN's commitment to protect those who dare to speak out. Imagine a once closed door slowly opening, shedding light on the organization's inner workings, symbolizing its pledge to transparency. Then envision fresh pairs of eyes, external auditors, bringing a new perspective, ensuring checks and balances. The once rusty gears of procurement are now rejuvenated, turning smoothly, reflecting streamlined operations and modern strategies. Lastly, see a steadfast guardian, the Ethics Office, emerging in the horizon, guiding the UN towards ethical decisions and practices. This isn't just a tale of recovering from a setback. It's a narrative of an institution evolving, learning, and striving for excellence. Through these reforms, the UN embarked on a rigorous journey of introspection and rectification, striving to align its vast operations with the principles it champions globally. The oil for food scandal, while rooted in past geopolitical maneuverings, continues to resonate in today's intricate global landscape. This event shed light on the delicate interplay between geopolitics and humanitarian initiatives, a dynamic still evident in present-day crises, like those in Syria, Ukraine, and Yemen, and the heated conflicts in Africa, where the boundaries between aid and international sanctions blur. Similarly, the criticism the UN faced then parallels the scrutiny international bodies, such as the World Health Organization amid the COVID-19 pandemic, contend with today. Their roles, efficacy, and potential biases are continually under the microscope. In our rapidly digitizing world, the emphasis on transparency and anti-corruption measures has intensified. Technologies like blockchain hint at the future of corruption-resistant systems, especially in areas like procurement. Whistleblowing, pivotal in unveiling the oil for food scandal, remains crucial. From governments to tech giants, whistleblowers today are in the limelight, reinforcing the oil for food lesson about the paramount importance of their protection. The scandal's aftermath also sharpened the focus on the private sector's global role, as multinational corporations sometimes have even more power than countries. While these companies are not countries and bear responsibility differently, we have to be careful with their involvement in modern geopolitics, as small mistakes can lead to global consequences. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.